What is the deepest internet rabbit hole you've ever fallen into? The history of Rosicrucianism. It's fascinating. Basically, some fellow wrote a couple of books in the early 17th century, what we today would call utopian science fiction. It purported to be manifestos describing a secret society of enlightened masters, working secretly to create an esoteric science for the betterment of humanity. Needless to say, this was completely invented by the writer, but it found a ready audience of people who very much wanted to believe it was true, and an endless stream of charlatans claiming to be those esoteric masters. Eventually, the authorities in various places became alarmed. The authorities never liked the notion of secret societies expressly working on social change, particularly in an era of religious upheaval, and the manifestos were larded with religious and Kabbalistic ideas. And they started to crack down on these Rosicrucians, which just had the effect of convincing the public that the esoteric masters actually existed. Perhaps the most bizarre and influential outcome, the so-called Invisible College of Thinkers and Scientists in England was inspired by this, which eventually morphed into the Royal Society, with luminaries like Sir Isaac Newton at the helm. In other words, in some ways simply wishing something to exist actually made something like it exist in reality. As the Royal College had tremendous influence on the actual and not imaginary history of science, it is amazing how much the early participants were into religious mysticism, alchemy, and the like, as well as what we would now call science, Newton in particular. Indeed, originally, there was little to differentiate a natural philosopher from a good old-fashioned alchemist or magician or esoteric master. And it is interesting how that separation came to exist, something ongoing in this era, namely that science, as it came to be known eventually, was based on a methodology that emphasized communication of information and repeatable results, rather than hidden or esoteric knowledge, and, as a consequence, proved to be more useful. The notion of Rosicrucianism also of course gave birth to numerous societies bearing that name, all claiming descent from the original manifestos and leaning more on the esoteric and mystic side. Perhaps the original manifestos are truly among the most influential secular works of fiction ever. Was in a Facebook group about loving retro video games, and someone made a relevant post that was also memorializing someone who had committed suicide. I went on the person's Facebook page and spent 3 hours learning about the life and death of a complete stranger on the other side of the country from me, and I was crying yo at it. It's not anyone famous, so I will be keeping their privacy. Sorry guys. Hermit crabs. I don't own or desire to own a hermit crab. The one day I stumbled across hermit crab care information by accident and couldn't stop reading. I spent the entire day on this. I eventually ended up on some blog detailing what happened when a guy apparently well known in the hermit crab keeping hobby forums passed away, and how they handled finding care for his massive amount of pet hermit crabs after. The most interesting thing I learned is that you have to be careful with a hermit crab that has just molted if they're in a tank with multiple hermit crabs. Hermit crabs eat their shed skin to regain the nutrients. If the newly molted crab runs into others while the smell of shed skin is still on it, the others will go, "Oh yay, tasty shed skin," and eat it. They actually make a special scent remover you can wash your crab in to remedy this. A young woman on Reddit said she was going to off herself. Using her post history, I figured out where she lived, where she worked, called, then spoke to someone who knew her. They gave me the name of her boyfriend, found his number. Turns out that he had broken up with her but still cared, so he went over and stopped her. I was up all night. Okay, I finally have a place to talk about this. I stumbled upon a YouTube video about an entire family. It was basically an incest cesspool. Unbelievable amounts of abuse, of all kinds, had been taking place within this family for multiple generations that went on until 2012. It was honestly one of the most disgusting and abhorrent things I'd ever learned about. What's even fucking weirder is, even after this family was discovered, which took decades because they lived out in the middle of nowhere and were isolated from society, multiple family members had active Instagram and social media accounts that were public, with pictures. I went down an entire rabbit hole of at least 10 to 15 different family members' Instagram accounts. Some even had posts with disturbing comments toward each other. I had the thought that these could have been faked, but it was weird that a lot of the pictures uploaded weren't anywhere else online. It was also already proven that an account on TikTok made by a younger member was legitimate, and everything I was finding myself through these social media accounts were extremely bizarre and sad. It's been a while since I came across this, so I may have a few details backwards. But I believe this was the Colt family known as the Colt clan incest case, and Colt is not their real name. The only reason I went down the rabbit hole of their social media was after finding a random post online that had doxed their real name. The entire thing still feels like a fever dream. It was so disturbing. A few years ago, I stumbled into a forgotten corner of the web while trying to find old NASA livestream archives. One link led to a Japanese FTP site that was still online, filled with folders labeled in strange shorthand like STS-115X and Orbital Debrief 1999. Inside were grainy videos and audio logs that seemed real, NASA insignias, launch chatter, and coordinates. But none of the missions matched anything public. Some of the clips even had what looked like internal commentary about visual interference and foreign telemetry signatures. The deeper I dug, the more the timestamps overlapped with actual shuttle missions. Then one day the whole server vanished, replaced with a 403 error page that had a single blinking underscore in the corner, like a command prompt waiting for input. To this day, I've never found anyone who's seen it or heard of it. Even the Wayback Machine skips over it like it was never there. I don't know what I found. Maybe some elaborate hoax, but every so often I get the urge to search those mission codes again. Nothing ever comes up, but every few months, my search history still shows STS-115X sitting there, even when I know I didn't type it. Man, when I was a teenager I got so into research chemicals, but without any real access to them. Aside from clonazepam and DXN, until uni, I would stay up all night reading about stimulants, psychedelics, opioids, benzos, dissociatives, etc. And because I didn't have access, I'd just imagine what it was like to be on them. Really got it into my head that using them would make me a better person. Only years later and after I finally was able to get my hands on a variety of them, did I realize they were an escape. A sort of performative way to be cool and above others, yeah right. It did teach me I was good at reading and summarizing research though, and I now am a psychologist, CBT therapist. Go figure. It's been a long time, but way back in the early days of the World Wide Web 9798, there was a site called Web Roulette. You'd go to the site, press refresh, and you'd be presented with 5 completely random URLs. Most of them were random documents, the kind of stuff you'd find on the deep web these days. Mostly just data or papers on stuff that anybody not involved would be incredibly confused about. Or random business websites. But every once in a while you'd be presented with a hidden gem. One morning in computer class, I clicked refresh and was presented with a link to a site on a web ring. A bunch of sites associated with the same thing and linked together, focused on a jihad to destroy Barney the dinosaur. It was a bunch of stories, poems, text-based RPGs, and original artwork focused around Barney as an evil entity out to destroy our children. One of my personal favorites was a parody of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven called The Barney. It's been almost 30 years and I still swing by from time to time to see if there's new content. I am, without qualification, an old son of a bitch, and I can testify that, if you have the right kind of mind, you don't need no lame-ass internet to fall 1,000 feet into a rabbit hole using a library. It's a book by A.C. Clarke titled A Fountains of Paradise had a rabbit hole bait line that went something like this. On the wall was a picture from Rolt's famous classic of Brunel, standing in front of the anchor chains of the Great Western. Today you can type that into Google and duplicate my card catalog search on a single minute. My search, in 1980, wandered through the University of Idaho's library and wound up with correspondence with the institutions of civil engineers in the UK. My fall led me to developing Probability, the most complete collection of literature of the life of the Victorian engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the carbolic acid-powered locomotive, the Great Western, the tunnel under the Thames, a train driven by remote compressed air. I began with Isambard Kingdom Brunel by L.T.C. Rolt and wound up receiving a blueprint elevation of the Royal Albert Bridge at Saltash. I am delighted with falling into rabbit holes. My very first began in 1969 with a hitchhiking road trip to California, rooming in a genuine whorehouse in Long Beach, a tour in Vietnam, a 4-year tour in Germany, and a $0 18 donation to the Imperial War Museum in London. Rabbit holes. My favorite thing in all the world. Quantum mechanics and physics. Its movement in different fields, webs. The movement in a field determines what we call that particle or wave. That light is like lol at time, and it's pure kinetic energy, meaning it has no standing mass. That my brain is melting with this new information because I'm too stubborn to math. So now I'm like I can't go any further without at least understanding math, and my brain is melting. Like what determines the fields? Like what? Now black holes are on my list of things that make my stomach flip thinking about. The list doesn't make sense or had any logic behind it. If you're really curious about my list, it's sea stars, jellyfish, longworms chilling at the bottom of the ocean, gooey ducks, some species of mushrooms, and otters. So black holes are my newest addition to that list. The sailing stones of Death Valley. They're a bunch of stones that very slowly move around the desert, leaving cool tracks due to their weight pressing down on the dried mud of the desert. The mechanism of how they move is interesting in its own right. Basically, below freezing temperatures at night cause minute ice crystals to form, and any breeze moves the stone a tiny little bit as this happens, happening again and again every night, adding up to noticeable movement. They move the farthest in winter. The research that discovered all this is kind of cute. In the 1970s, they decided to figure it out, so they labeled and carefully tracked the exact location of a few dozen of these stones. Every single day, for years, they gave them names. At first, it was Stone A, Stone B, etc. That as the researchers familiarized themselves with the stones, they began to use nicknames for each one instead. Mary, Susan, etc. One of the heaviest, 320 kilograms, Karen, actually got lost at one point. Nobody could find her for a few years, despite how carefully everything was recorded. How heavy Karen was, and how few people frequented the inhospitable area. Plus people, animals, and vehicles leave tracks in the dry mud just as the stones famously do. So if someone came and hauled her away in a truck, there would be very clear signs. But no, she just vanished into thin air. How can a great big rock even get lost at all? The researchers were, adorably, really worried and upset until she reappeared later, safe and sound. It's still a mystery what happened to her. But she and the other stones are even more closely monitored now. Nowadays the stones have GPSs attached and all sorts of fancy cameras to record the infinitesimal movements, but the stones are moving less, and there are concerns that climate change will cause them to ultimately become sedentary. Like regular rocks, you can feel the sadness of the scientists involved when you read interviews that care so much about those rocks. The weirdest stuff, by far, is all the bonkers conspiracy theories. People think the stones are proof that aliens built the pyramid, that we're all in the Matrix, that invisible angels are basically playing a very slow soccer game, or that underneath there's a subterranean psychic training facility hidden by the government. In recent years, probably the Creepshow art drama. If you were terminally online during the COVID just post-lockdown era, you probably heard that a YouTuber was outed for being a 4chan lolco, which is basically 4chan, but with mean girls instead of incels user and a stalker. She'd managed to make a lot of acquaintances in the commentary space, so virtually every commentary YouTuber had to cover it. What you might not know is that this drama was the direct result of another YouTuber, Toby, making a call-out video on Creepshow art over a year prior that snowballed into several dramas that were all interconnected. Toby's call-out video was actually alright, but it turned out to be a fleeting moment of rationality for her, as she was deeply volatile and reactionary otherwise. Even so, she can't have foreseen how that video indirectly lead to Creepshow actually being exposed as a stalker. Cecil McFly has a very helpful video condensing the entire 2 or so years worth of bullshit. If any of you have 4 hours to spare or need some low-stakes bullshit to listen to while you're working, I'm just going to clarify here that Shannon's lolco use was less about being on the website and more about the stuff she said there. She talked about a lot of YouTubers she was acquainted and even friends with, wove a whole tissue of lies about Peaches and Emily, and occasionally used the odd slur or two. People kind of forgot about the lolco stuff once the stalker allegations came out. Watching lots of videos from 2 different schizophrenic YouTubers, who each also accidentally had some good ASMR qualities to their voices and presentations. One was called Degrox then Degropst 1, and later thegroxtalfamy. The core of his content had a lot of the typical "the Illuminati are satanic and here's all the signs and symbols they put right in front of us to tell us what's going on and what they're gonna do" type shit. But what he also did a lot was pull up different places on Google Earth and then trace out really silly looking, childlike doodles on it, and then explain how these doodles represent the way the end of the world is going to play out. What really made me interested in him though, is how peacefully relaxed he was in all of his videos, explaining this shit. Like, if you pictured the stereotypical screaming homeless man while reading my description of him, I wouldn't blame you a bit. But no, instead he sounded like a really chill tour guide for nature walks, all while explaining nuclear holocaust and the Book of Revelations. Unfortunately, I haven't found anything made by him for at least 3 years now, so I can't help but wonder if he's dead now. The other one was Lord Steventrist, and he was way more interesting and insane. He claimed to be Jesus because of course he did, and his main topic was showing how the world, and the whole universe as well, were actually all concave. Like, we don't live on the Earth, we live in the Earth. And outer space, well actually, it's inner space. And all of inner space is contained in a glass ball above us, which is the center of the Earth and the universe. And when you watch the sunrise, you're actually watching the sunset, and vice versa. And most of his videos were explaining how this is possible despite literally everything that says otherwise. But as insane as he was, he also had an unbelievable knack for ASMR from both his voice and his drawing skills, which were also very good, to the point where it made me kinda sad sometimes that he clearly had real talent at drawing and grasping a lot of scientific concepts, only to have it all be appended and ruined by an illness I'm sure he couldn't really help. Unfortunately, Chris was also more on the stereotypically crazy side of things compared to thegroxt. He was put in prison back around 2010 for threatening to kill Obama, and then again in 2018 for threatening to kill Trump. Both threats I think were done because they wouldn't recognize my authority, you know, because he's Jesus. And then back in 2020 or 2021, he died in prison from a respiratory infection.